And hello there again. Oh my gosh, this is week 9. Can you believe it? You guys are rocking out this semester. I hope you're taking some time for yourself as well as spending lots of time studying as you progress through this semester of coursework. We're moving on in the study of research, and we're going to talk about collecting quantitative data this week. We've spent the last several weeks looking at ethical issues related to research, why research is important to the social work profession, the overarching methodologies of positivist and interpretive, and the different designs that we can use to carry out research, as well as measurements and data collection tools. So now we're going to actually talk about methods for collecting quantitative data, which reflects the data that we collect from a positivist perspective. And the data, according to the book, which I couldn't have said it any better, it's the heartbeat of all studies. It is actually what makes the study come alive. So collecting the data is very important, obviously, in this, because you can propose the study, you can design the study, you can consider the ethics of the study, purpose of the study, everything. But if you actually don't collect the data, the study never comes to life. It never has meaning. What is a data collection method? And actually, this is a detailed plan of the procedures that you're going to use to gather data for the specific purpose. Everything in the research process is linked, from your research question to the purpose to how you're going to answer that question or satisfy that purpose, which is where we get into the data collection method. Under methodologies, we have sampling procedures, which we talked about last week, and now we're going to talk about how to collect the data from the data sources that are available to us. For us in social work research, the primary source of data is going to be people, because that's who we work with. Our primary source of data, or where we obtain our information from to answer our research question, is going to be from people, from clients, from practitioners, from stakeholders, from the public, whoever that may be, but that is our primary source of data. Now, first-hand data comes from the people who are directly experiencing the problem. So this is where we would actually gather the data to answer our question from those individuals who are experiencing the problem that we have stated in the purpose of our study. Most of the time, this is going to be our clients. And it can actually be professionals, peers, other individuals. But most of the time, we're looking at some form of client, stakeholder, client population in terms of where we're going to gather the firsthand data. One of the examples would be to use a stress scale to determine levels of stress for clients who might be participating in a program to reduce anxiety or to reduce stress or to increase mindfulness. So the client stress is measured when the client completes the stress scale. So this is an example of first-hand data. Secondary data can come from people who are not directly experiencing the problem. And this actually could be from others who observe behaviors in somebody and report it. So secondary data is going to be like if you ask parents the level of stress their adolescents exhibit when they're at home. You're getting the parent's perception of the adolescent's stress. So it's not first-hand data, it's second-hand data, and that's because the parents are interpreting what they see to be the adolescent stress. You're not actually gathering it from the adolescent. I want to make a note here, though. It's very important to understand what your research question is, because your research question actually may be, how do parents perceive their adolescent's level of stress? When you collect that data, that's going to be first-hand data because you're collecting the perception from the parents, and that's what you're interested in, versus is a research question that would be, what level of stress do adolescents experience at home? And then you ask the parents to answer that question. That would be secondary data and not firsthand. So the types of data that we can collect, or the methods that we use to collect the data, can actually be survey questionnaires. And if you remember back when we talked about methods for conducting research, survey is a method, questionnaire is a way of collecting the data, and it can be a measurement tool or way of gathering that information. We can use structured observation, we can use secondary data or existing data. Now, secondary data in what we're going to talk about here is a little bit different from what we talked about when we were collecting it from actual people. From people, we have the first-hand data, and then we have the second-hand data, which is also referred to as secondary data. Here, we're going to talk about secondary data in terms of it being already existing data. So we're going to break down survey questionnaires, structured observations, secondary data, and existing data. And let's talk about what are data to begin with. So data is the recorded units of information that we're going to use as the basis for making sense out of our research study. We use it to reason, we use it for calculations, we use it for purposes of discussion. The units that we record of information, and data is plural, datum is singular. Original data, that's the data that we collect for the first time. So that's where we're actually collecting that original data from people who might be providing it to us as first-hand data, so it's the individuals who are actually experiencing the problem, or it could be that second-hand data where it's perceptions of others about the problem. So to answer our research question or test our hypothesis, we would actually original data. It's the first time these recorded units of data have been captured or been recorded in order to answer that research question. Existing data, this is when previously collected and stored information is used to answer a new research question. This has been done even before we even thought about our research study or even put together a proposal or a plan. This data was collected for another purpose and then it was stored. So we can use that. Positivistic data, that's where we look at numerical data using mathematical computations and calculations, and interpretive data analyzes words or text. That should be text, not test. Okay, original data is data that we're going to collect for the first time to answer our research question. It's done to fill a specific purpose as we have outlined in our research question or stated in our hypothesis. This is original data. It's the first time these units of information have been recorded to answer our specific research question. Existing data is when we use data that was previously collected and recorded for another purpose, and this was done even before we thought about our study, but it's out there, it exists, and we could technically, in some instances, use it to answer our research question. But we just have to realize it was collected and stored for a different reason, and we're going to use it to answer a new research question. Then the positivistic data is what we use in terms of numerical data to analyze our results, and we use this in mathematical computations and calculations for our reasoning and discussion purposes. Quantitative data, which is our focus this week, is actually the positivistic data. No matter how we collect it, it's going to be transformed into numerical data somehow. Interpretive data analyzes words or text. Again, that should be text. And this is done with the qualitative approach to research. Now, sometimes in a positivistic data collection method, we might have some open-ended questions, but they don't necessarily fall into the interpretive data level, which is qualitative. So we may include some open-ended questions and do some different things with that in terms of our reasoning and discussion, and potentially even some calculation. But just know that having an open-ended question contained within a positivistic data source does not make it interpretive and does not make it qualitative. So let's begin by looking at survey questionnaires. This is one of the most common ways social workers collect data. This is a method for researching social problems. The aim of a survey is to collect data from a population or a sample of research participants and then describe them as a group. One form of a survey is a questionnaire, and the questionnaire is designed to collect substantial information from a group of individuals, typically at one point in time or one snapshot in time, so that can make it a one-shot case study. Survey research and questionnaires are considered to be pre-experimental designs, generally used for descriptive purposes. The book talked about using it for 2 variables, and there can be some comparisons and even some correlations depending on how that information is collected through the survey process. But other than that, this is actually used to describe a sample of research participants, a group of individuals, and it's not used for anything beyond that in terms of being able to make statements about causality. So the actual questionnaire is a carefully selected set of questions that relate to the variables in our research question. So we have a research question, and then we ask individuals specific questions to gather data that can then be analyzed to answer our research question. Don't get those two confused. You have the research question, but then you actually ask individuals a lot of questions, and then that information, that data, is used to analyze and inform the research question. As demonstrated in the book, survey questionnaires can be used to collect data in order to answer a 2-variable research question, as long as measurement of both variables, and then some comparisons can be made to answer more about those variables than if you were just asking about one variable. There's 2 types of questionnaires. There's standardized and non-standardized. And we touched on standardized and non-standardized when we were talking about measurement. The standardized questionnaires are the ones where validity and reliability have been established already through a set of psychometrics, or the testing of those. Standardized questionnaires include your stress scales, your depression scales. I think the book used one talking about social services usage. Those are standardized instruments. Non-standardized questionnaires are ones that are created specifically to answer the research question or test the well, you really wouldn't test the hypothesis here, but to answer the research question under study. Do not have reliability and validity established. Many things that we use are non-standardized in terms of social work. It could be a client satisfaction survey that we administer at our agency. We can also create questionnaires that will embed a standardized measurement along with non-standardized questions. We actually have to be able to separate those out when we're doing our analysis. Maybe you're asking or you're looking at the level of stress of client. You provide them with a questionnaire, which is one document, but within that questionnaire you include a stress scale that is a standardized instrument. But you're also asking them about their demographics, and you're asking them about some other areas of their life to get variables that may inform that level of stress. So standardized instruments are the ones, or standardized questionnaires are the ones that have reliability and validity established. Non-standardized questionnaires lack the reliability and the validity, and you can actually combine the two when you're doing a survey. Now, we can collect data through survey questionnaires by using electronic questionnaires. We can mail out questionnaires. We could actually provide a questionnaire that's a hard copy that would be in a face-to-face setting where it's still administered by the individual. Or we could do a face-to-face interview where there is one individual who is asking the questions and recording the responses, or we could do phone interviews. So what we want to be able to do first is establish the actual data collection procedures. When we create the questionnaire, especially if it's going to be self-administered, we need to make sure that there's straightforward, simple instructions for completing it. We have to determine how informed consent will be obtained. If it's through an electronic questionnaire, if it's through a mail questionnaire, any way where the researcher is not engaging directly with the individual, There needs to be a statement attached in the informed consent document indicating that if they complete the questionnaire, then that they are voluntarily agreeing to participate in the study. The introduction letter would essentially be your informed consent. It would provide all the necessary information to the individual and then have a statement that indicates that their completion of the questionnaire indicates their voluntary participation in the study. This is often done with electronic questionnaires and often done with mail-out questionnaires. If you're doing it in a face-to-face venue and you're actually recording the answers from the individuals asking the questions and recording the answers, then the informed consent may be read and the individual may actually sign it. But this has to be determined ahead of time to be sure that you have informed consent for this. If you're actually going to be having somebody do the interview and record the responses, then prior to beginning anything, there has to be training for those interviewers so that they will collect the data in a standardized way. They'll understand what the questions are asking and then be able to guide the participant if necessary, but then actually be able to record the information so it will be meaningful. Data gathered from questionnaires are in a numerical form, and they actually may be gathered in terms of words, but then numbers are used to represent those. So if we look at the nominal level of measurement, which is categorical or just the name. If we're looking at political party, then we're going to have Republican, Democrat, Independent. When this is put into a statistical package, then the numbers will represent those. So we'll have 1 for Republican, 2 for Democrat, 3 for Independent. Now at the nominal level, the only thing that we can actually do with this information would be able to count, but we will turn it into a numerical form. Numbers are used to represent intensity, which can be at an ordinal level. So we could have the example of satisfaction with access to voting booths. Very dissatisfied, satisfied, one of those should be very satisfied. Sorry about that. Number 1 would be very dissatisfied. Number 2 would be satisfied. Number 3 should be very satisfied. We can actually measure with an intensity level, and we can actually use numbers to represent their actual meaning. How many times have you voted for president? 5, 4, 2, 1, 0, whatever that answer may be. No matter what level we're collecting the data at, it will be turned into some numerical representation of it. When we talk about reliability and validity and establishing that, again, standardized questionnaires already have those established. If you're using a non-standardized questionnaire, these are not going to be established, and it does take a lot of testing to get to that level. But reliability values tell us how confident we can be in using our questionnaire over 2 or more time periods, across different people, across different places. It lets us know that there's reliability in the responses that are being obtained. Validity gives us information about how good our questionnaire is at measuring what we say it's going to measure. So if we can capture or if we can find standardized questionnaires, then we're going to know what their reliability and their validity are. And then just know if you've created your own questionnaire specific to answer a question, if you're using one that somebody else has created but it's not been established, reliability and validity, you cannot report that your instrument has either of these. What are the advantages? Advantages of questionnaires or using survey questionnaires is they're relatively inexpensive way to collect data, especially with the technology that we have now, and you can actually create questionnaires using free software, even through Google Forms. You can reach large numbers of people and to get very specific data and collect it in an efficient way, and it's even easier now to input into the computer. If you're doing it electronically through Google Forms or another format, most of those will dump into at least Excel, if not into SPSS or SAS or some of the other software packages. The disadvantages of them, if it's a self-administered questionnaire, the participants will have to be literate. They're going to actually have to be able to read and understand what the questions are asking. If you're mailing out, doing electronic, you're typically going to get a low response rate, so you need to be sure that you access or solicit a large number of individuals so you can get the responses that you're looking for, the number that you're looking for. If you're mailing them out, emailing them out, using telephone interviews, again, participants must have either an email address, a mailing address, a phone number. So this could eliminate potential participants from your study if they don't have these methods of communication. In-depth or open-ended questions are often missed, and if they are responded to, it may be a 1 or 2 word response, as opposed to if you're doing an interview, face-to-face interview or telephone interview, you can prompt the individual to respond more in depth in these areas. But if it's self-administered, then you may not get what you're looking for there. And we're using very simple questions to provide answers to typically complex research questions. So these are some of the disadvantages of using survey questionnaires. The second most common way for social workers to gather data is going to be through structured observations. And this is where a trained observer records interaction of others in a specific place over an agreed amount of time using specific procedures and measurements. So it's very structured. That's the key here, is all of these steps are outlined for the observer, and they're trained in collecting this information, but it's actually done through direct observation. So essentially in structured observations, the data that's collected is going to reflect the observer's perceptions of the interactions. While you can have it very specifically defined, it's still going to have a subjective component to it because it's going to depend upon the observer to identify the behavior you're looking for and to interpret it in the way that you are anticipating it will be interpreted, and then record it. The observers do not interact with those being observed. They just watch and record. This does require that the variables being measured are specifically defined, or what the book actually termed micro-defined. They have to be defined so well in a way that the observer is going to record it and identify it in the same way every single time. Or in the case if you have multiple observers, they're all actually going to identify the behavior and record it in the same way. The general types of recordings that are available will be frequency, duration, and magnitude, and we'll talk about interval versus spot checking recording. So first of all, when we're recording frequencies, then we're actually just counting every time a behavior has occurred. There's nothing else to it. We just mark it down when the behavior has occurred. It could actually be done during a specified period of time in the day, morning, afternoon, for 60 minutes, for 30 minutes. You could record it. Duration is just that. You're going to actually record how long the behavior lasts each time it is observed. So this may require a stopwatch, some way to actually capture the duration of that recording. And then the magnitude will actually capture the intensity level of the behavior, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe. So again, you can see how important it is to really micro-define the variable that you're wanting the data collected on. And that typically here for structured observations is going to be a behavior, an external behavior. It's going to have to be something that is observed. You'll notice as you've been reading single subject designs, this actually goes back and ties very closely with that methodology, single subject design methodology, through structured observations. One way of carrying out a single subject design. Now you can actually have observations using other methodologies too, but these two link up very nicely, and it's about a behavior. It's about something that is observable because it's got to be a person outside of the participant who can see it, note that it's there, recognize how you're wanting it to be measured, and then record that information. It could be done at interval recordings, which is actually capturing the behavior and recording it at specified intervals over a continuous period of time. It could actually be done for 60 minutes and done every 5 minutes. Whatever is going to be appropriate for the observation that you're needing to collect data on is what you're going to do here, but it's going to be very specific again, just like the behavior you're asking the observer to record. It's going to be very specific as to the time frame from which they record it. And then spot checking is the other, and that just records intermittent observations through periods of time. So depending upon your research question, depending on the observations that you're recording, you can choose some type of interval, continuous recording, or spot check recording. For structured observations, you actually have to establish data collection procedures. This will actually mean in the training has to be done. Those who are watching for the presence or absence of the specific behaviors and recording the methods must be trained before data collection ever begins. You have to determine the types of data to be recorded, the frequency, duration, magnitude, whatever that looks like. Again, this is part of your plan, and this happens before the recording ever begins. You have to determine if it's going to be continuous, interval, or spot check, and you have to decide who will do the observation. Is this going to be professionally trained outside observers, or is it going to be best to use indigenous observers? The benefits of indigenous observers are, of course, that they have a better understanding related to culture, related to behaviors, related to perceptions, interpretations. Professionally trained outside observers will possibly be more objective, more focused in on the actual criteria around the behaviors that need to be observed. So it's a trade-off, and you just have to decide what's going to be best for your research project. We also use secondary data, and secondary data is described as existing data used to answer a newly developed research question. This is an unobtrusive way to gather data to answer your research question, and it is collecting information from data sources where the information had been previously collected for a different reason. So we don't necessarily establish a data collection method when we use secondary data, as if we were using primary information or primary data. Here we want to actually evaluate the data set's worth and how it will answer our research question. We have a research question and we find secondary data, then we have to evaluate. If I use this data, will it answer my research question? This can be done with accessing existing databases, and these are becoming much more and more available in terms of what public databases would be available to work with. It can be done from client records or other repositories of information. So this is data, this is information that exists, it's out there, it was collected for a reason other than to answer your research question. Now you're going to use it to answer your research question, which is a new question. The one thing that we have to be concerned about is if we are using client records or any existing information that can be linked back to clients, we have to consider the aspect of informed consent. Were clients made aware that their data may be used for the purposes of future research? And if not, then we have to evaluate the ethical aspect of using those records. Using client records will require some type of oversight, ethical committee oversight, institutional review board oversight, something along those lines. Secondary data that come from existing databases that may be public data, those actually don't require oversight. So you have to make that ethical decision here to determine if the individuals who provided the data you're going to be using to answer your research question were made aware that this information could be used for future research. The other thing that we have to be aware of when we're using secondary data, especially if we're using it from large databases, that we're going to actually have to extract variables, because there may be so much information in there and data collected on so many different variables. We have to determine which ones will inform our research question. If this is done in an electronic format, so you're actually accessing a database through some electronic format, then you can actually use statistical software to extract those variables that you're going to need to answer your research question. Most of these formats will dump into a CVS or Excel file. Some of them will dump into other statistical software such as SPSS or SAS. So electronically, you could extrapolate what you need. If you're actually looking at data from hard copy client records, you're going to sit down with a client that file and you're going to extrapolate the information you need, the variables that you're looking at to answer your research question, you will have to have a method for doing this. And I like to describe this as creating a survey questionnaire for the file. Create a data collection guide, and it's all the information you're going to extract from each file. You can physically do this and record it on a piece of paper and then enter it into a computer for analysis, or you can create it directly in Excel or another software package and then enter it there. But there'll have to be a plan somewhere to extract the variables you're going to need from this existing secondary data in order to answer your research question. Advantages, disadvantages. Again, secondary data, it's reasonable, it's inexpensive way, it's unobtrusive, it's available to you to be able to answer your research question without you depending on or intruding into the lives of actual people and participants. It will allow for a fairly easy comparison of data sets, especially from different countries and across different time spans, because technology now has allowed us to capture large data sets that more of us have access to. And then the technology that's available now improves the accessibility of these data sets. Disadvantages, our research question is limited by the possibilities of the data set. So again, we have our research question, but because data was gathered for a purpose other than answering our research question, it might not just quite fit exactly, so we have some limitations there. We also have the option of using existing statistics, and this is a form of secondary data, but it's available only in numerical form, and statistics has actually already been computed on this. So you don't have access to the raw data, you only have access to the statistics that have already been computed for this data set. There are two types of existing statistics, or there are actually two types of statistics, and when we get into the next few weeks we'll be talking about these, but it's descriptive and inferential. Descriptives are statistics that actually just describe characteristics of the sample population. Inferential are where we actually make those statements about the data relating to a larger population. So when using existing statistics, we do proceed the same way as in secondary data by first establishing their credibility. Will they answer our research question, and are they credible? To determine this, we must be able to access information about the original data, where it was collected and how it was analyzed, and we'll have to have an understanding of the purpose of each statistic that they have used and the assumptions that inform that statistic. So we have to have a pretty strong understanding of statistical procedure, the statistical test, the assumptions behind the statistical test, and we need to have knowledge about how that information was gathered. Include that it's inexpensive and unobtrusive again. We can ask more complicated research questions, and then this is often used to advance the knowledge level. So this is a high level in terms of doing research. This is actually a very high level way of advancing our knowledge base. You'll see existing statistics used in meta-analysis. When you find a meta-analysis article, there's very structured methodologies for using existing statistics, and this is one of the highest level explanatory research processes that we engage in. It does provide us the opportunity to compare the results of several research studies in an empirical way. The disadvantage of it is that, again, you don't have the individual cases. We can only answer research questions about groups or about the entire sample because the statistics have already been computed. Sometimes it's difficult to assess how the data were collected and analyzed, and because they were already analyzed, there is an increased risk for that human error to have occurred. So you need a high level knowledge of statistics to be able to use existing statistics for the purposes of answering a research question. That's a brief overview of collecting quantitative data by using survey questionnaires, structured observations, secondary data, and existing statistics. And these are the four primary ways we would collect quantitative data.